Richard Dawkins is quite famous. He's all over YouTube, he's on TV, he's written books that have sold millions of copies. And I'm just focusing in on a narrow portion of his work where he is arguing that science is superior to religion. Science conflicts with religion and has many, many advantages over religion. Now, Dawkins is a biologist. He's from Oxford, so that's a highly credentialed biologist. He's the author of The Selfish Gene and The Blind Watchmaker. These have sold millions, and he's quite prominent. Here, again, I'm going to try to do my best to present his views, and at the end of this video, I'll have some criticisms. An example, he gives an example of the people who say that science and religion conflict. This is one view of the relationship between science and religion. There are other views as well. And Dawkins says that faith is one of the world's great evils. And science, on the other hand, is not a religion, and it does not involve faith. So very much trying to set science as opposed to religion. And scientific beliefs are based on evidence, while religious beliefs are based solely on faith, implying that they have no evidence at all. Now, religion and science compete and conflict. This is his view of the relationship between the two. They're in competition and they conflict. Now, he does say that science is a moral discipline, and its practitioners, he argues, are among the most moral and honest people in the world because science requires honesty. Science does not advance without honesty, and because of that, scientists by and large are very moral and honest people. Now, religion is said to provide three different benefits for people. The benefits of explanation, providing a context of the world and who we are in it, providing consolation, some comfort when we're suffering, and providing uplift, some encouragement and experiences of great emotions about the world we live in. But Dawkins argues that even amongst those things that religion is supposed to do well, science does a better job providing those things. And he goes through these one by one. So he says science is better at explanation. So there are religious forms of cosmology and biology, and they are false. Says Dawkins. So the idea that God just created the universe and all the animals, that's what religion says, but that's false. Scientific evolution, on the other hand, is much better at explaining things. And on the aspect of consolation, you might not necessarily think there's competition here, but Dawkins argues that religion offers false hope, such as reuniting with lost loved ones. So it promises consolation, so to speak, but they're false hopes. Science offers the truth that there is no afterlife. And if false hopes are desired, if that's what you want, or false hopes, well, science does a pretty good job at that. You can provide pain meds or anti-anxiety medications, and that'll allow you to feel good if that's what you're interested in, is feeling better. Science is also better at uplift, at encouragement, at providing these mountaintop experiences, because the scientific uses of the telescope, the microscope, these provide such experiences when you're able to discover new things by scientific equipment. That is very encouraging and uplifting. In terms of education, Dawkins says, look, people often claim that science has a religious aspect, like evolution, presumably naturalistic evolution. And he says, if that's so, well, science ought to be included in religious education. And he is British, where there is state religious education, but you could include that in religious education in a variety of contexts in the United States as well. So children should not be raised in any particular religion. They should be raised with scientific truths and theories. And he says that it's mental child abuse to raise a child in a particular religion. Instead, they ought to be raised with scientific views of the world. Children should be taught the age of the universe, billions of years old, and the insignificance of Christ. Reports of his life and death could not have even left the galaxy yet, going at the maximum speed that radio waves go. They would not have even left the galaxy. You can see, of course, why Dawkins is polarizing here. But let's go on to consider some more aspects of his ideas. He talks about both prophecy and morality. And he says, when it comes to prophecy, or the predictions that science make, they should be held and set aside those vague and ambiguous claims of religious prophets. No religion can predict with accuracy like science can, and especially things like astronomy. So predicting the next solar eclipse, for example. Astronomy is so much better than the astrology of the Christian faith. His terminology, of course, and he gives the example of the star. I assume that's the star in Bethlehem that was pronouncing the birth of Christ. I'm not sure if he thinks there was no such thing or that it was in error. It's not really clear to me what his view on that is, but obviously he thinks it's problematic. And Dawkins says that science is a moral discipline, but really ultimately has little to say about ethics and morality. And he also says that science can show how little humans vary from the apes. You know, you look at the DNA and so on, and even behavior, how foolish it is to be preoccupied with human life over and above other life forms. So science can tell us how little humans matter in the universe. Continuing this concern about morality here and prophecy, science has something to say about eschatology, and he talks about what I would call a Russellian worldview, the idea that we already know eventually, of course, the sun will burn out, and we know that the earth will be destroyed at that time, and if humanity is still around, we will be destroyed with it. So that's what he is calling eschatology, the study of the end times. Now, maybe, he says, this is a concession on his part, that religious instruction has value in teaching literature, culture. So we have phrases in our language like a widow's mite or flesh is like grass that come from the Bible. There are many other phrases that are biblical that are informative and good for people to know, to be aware of that for the sake of literature and culture. Scientists sometimes might be charged with zealotry and bigotry, maybe even Dawkins himself. But he goes on to say, we're just amateurs. We're content to argue with those who disagree with us. We don't kill them, obviously implying about the dangers of religion, religious wars, and religious zealotry causing people to harm others. Okay, in terms of my criticisms of Dawkins, I'm going to be extremely brief, but a problem here is where to start. He certainly mischaracterizes religion in a couple places, but let's try to narrow things down a little bit. There are some inaccuracies of Dawkins, and he is concerned about truth. So let's explore this idea that faith is one of the world's greatest evils and causes of wars and death. Let's think about this just a little bit. First of all, this inaccuracy that religious belief is based solely on faith, which is contrasted with evidence of science. Certainly, most religious believers have some evidence for their faith, whether that's religious experience or arguments for the existence of God, and certainly those who are representative of religion, those who study theology and philosophy and have engaged intellectually in religious beliefs. There's clearly some reasons to believe that God exists, for example. He does not take into account the good that religion has done when he calls it one of the world's greatest evils. So, okay, maybe there is a lot of evil. Certainly a lot of religious people and leaders have been evil, and so evil has been done. But the fact is, religion has been the basis for the development of education in a formal context and science itself. So the universities of Europe and Oxford itself, where he works, is coming from a religious motivation and background. It was religion that motivated the development of the scientific method. It was religion that founded some of the great schools in the United States, Princeton and Harvard and Notre Dame and Baylor and many others. Religion is the basis for the most prominent kinds of humanitarian aid outside of maybe governmental aid, but even there, that often falls short to humanitarian aid provided by religious organizations, whether it's the Catholic Church or Samaritan's Purse, all kinds of religious organizations providing help for those in need. Certainly, religion is also a major force in providing sources of healthcare. If you just consider any hospital near you, if you're in the United States, definitely you're going to be thinking of hospitals with names that indicate they are religiously based. For my location, I can think of St. Francis, for example, or Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis, and St. Joseph's Hospital, and many other places that were founded by religious organizations. So if you're going to call them the greatest evil, you should at least acknowledge the good that has been done. Another inaccuracy regarding wars, there was a study by the BBC that found among the 20th century wars, a majority of them, including the most deadly ones, had nothing to do with religion. Now, certainly sometimes people who want to engage in warfare take up the claims of religion to do so. But even then, and this was not a religiously based survey, by the way. They rated the effects or the involvement of religion on all the wars through history on a scale of 0 to 5. And what I mean by what I've said here is that the majority of the wars in the 20th century and prior to the 20th century had zero influence by religion, and they were fairly aggressive in identifying religion. So, for example, the United States invasion of Iraq in the 1990s was identified as highly religiously based. Clearly, this is not the great evil in terms of warfare, and I'm sure that is something that historians can argue about, and others will pull out all kinds of evidence, but there's certainly clear reason to think that warfare has many other motives, and religion is a minor one. Another aspect of inaccuracy is that science itself does not exactly have clean hands. I'm sorry, this is not an inaccuracy. This is just another point here to make in criticizing Dawkins. He talks about scientists being among the most moral and honest people. Well, just like any religious organization that includes humans, the scientific community includes humans who are fallible and also motivated by all kinds of different things. So there have been myriads of cases of falsified studies by scientists trying to get funding, and it's unfortunately common. If you want to talk about evil done by science, eugenics was a basis that used by Hitler and Stalin. It's also in the United States. Again, we could go off and argue about this, what Margaret Mead was up to, but Sweden and people today using genetics as a way to try to purify humanity, that is very wicked motivations there. Clearly, Nazi experiments that were attempting to advance science. You had all kinds of scientists involved in horrific experiments. So it's not like science has clean hands. We could go on, and there are many, many other criticisms of Dawkins, and Dawkins has responded to many of those. Because he is such a polarizing figure, you can find all kinds of information on both sides of this if you do a little more searching online.